Alrighty, so welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. As with most WordPress Sydney sessions, this is very much chat first. So I have do I have it? I'll just open up chat window. There we go. I've got that open. So very much no pressure to turn on your cameras, no pressure to jump on the mic, no expectation that you need to have the right answers. There's no right answers in here. This isn't like a hot take session. I'm not going to show any videos or demonstrations or anything like that. It's not really about defining tools or stacks. It's more just kind of a thinking space, a chance maybe to reflect on how WordPress actually feels to work with just now, especially if you're kind of building and running real sites, real client sites. So feel free to drop some thoughts in the chat as we go along. Short reactions are perfect. Disagreements are fine too. We're not really trying to win any arguments here, just trying to be a little bit helpful. So the lens for tonight is kind of judgment and thinking. It's not specifically tools. It's about what we decide and how that matters, what we ignore and why that matters, and how we can stay a bit calm in a platform that can feel a bit noisier than ever before. All right, so let's get into it for tonight. So WordPress in 2026. Every year, if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm looking at different cameras and different monitors and keep my eye on the participants. I can just see someone else has arrived, admitting them, and keep an eye on the chat. So if I move my eyes around, that's what I'm doing. So every year, WordPress headlines suggest a turning point, new direction, new defaults, new ways of working. The feeling is that if you're not adapting quickly, you're kind of falling behind. As I mentioned, I'm quite active on Reddit, on LinkedIn, and there's always people saying, oh, have you looked at the new stuff that's coming? I was at the Sydney InQ conference, the one-day conference in Sydney in December, and there was lots of talk of AI and MCP servers, and have you got into that yet? And what are your thoughts? And so every year, WordPress, it feels busy because there's lots of stuff happening. And as I say, the feeling is that if you're not really adapting quickly, you're falling behind. That's a general feeling that came across when I'm speaking to people about all the WordPress changes. For most people in this meetup, their day-to-day work still looks surprisingly familiar. Content still needs structure. Performance still depends on context. Clients still want outcomes rather than features. So most change kind of shows up round about the edges first. So this talk is not about predictions about what's going to be in February, March, December. It's not about hype circles either, like AI, MCP. It's really about kind of zooming out and asking a couple of calm questions. So one is, what generally has changed in the last 12 to 16 months, 12 to 18 months, and what is still fundamentally the same underneath? So the goal really is not for agreement for everyone. It's just really clear thinking, a little bit of better judgment as to what things can be adopted, fewer reactive decisions, driven about fear of missing out. That's my 10-year-old's go-to is FOMO. Now everything's FOMO. And it kind of applies to this talk quite clearly. So during the talk, notice where you feel a bit of tension, a bit of confusion, maybe a bit of quiet confidence as the session unfolds as well. And don't be afraid to drop stuff down in the chat. I've got a few questions that I'll just throw out there as I'm going from slide to slide. You don't have to answer them, but they're just my really bad attempts of engagement. But the first question is, what's one thing in WordPress that felt like a big shift recently? Recently as in could be 6 months, last year, but didn't actually change how you work day to day. For me, it was that MCP. It was the whole AI thing, the MCP servers. Everyone jumped on the bandwagon. Oh, let's do this. Let's create this. Let's connect to that. But really, I don't use that day to day. And there's absolutely no plans in the next 6 months or any client projects talking about MCP servers. So that was a big shift for me, but really day to day, meh, don't care. Okay, so WordPress 2026 is back to planning 3 major releases this year: 7.0, 7.1, 7.2. So gone is the whole, we're not doing any, we're only doing one big release every year. We're now back on track to those 3 major releases. So this isn't about a kind of slow movement anymore. It really has picked up again. So WordPress, there's a reference, sorry, if you go to wordpress.org/about/roadmap, it kind of outlines this year's activities and what they're going to be doing from 7.0 and onwards. So you can have a look at that and get an idea as to where WordPress is going this year. But what's different this year isn't the number of releases necessarily, it's the nature of the change. If you read between the lines, we're not really seeing big architectural resets. There are a few big things on the plan, but we're not seeing a huge change to core. We're really seeing kind of steady refinement. Collaboration features, responsive controls, media improvements, AI integration, but with guardrails on it, block tool expansion, that sort of stuff. So for me, it doesn't feel like huge, big changes being hammered in. It feels more like a bit of maturity on the platform. So the change pattern now seems to be more evolving rather than kind of revolutionary, plonk things in, you know, the Gutenberg editor, the customizer, you know, think back to then, full site editing, huge, big changes. Now the shift is more kind of progressive. I think it's refining stuff, it's making things better and updating. So big disruption forces everyone to move at the same time, but this kind of continuous evolvement doesn't have that kind of jerkiness to it. But it does require judgment, because you get that feeling that it's still changing, that all these things are out there. And, you know, again, it goes back to, should I be looking at that? Should I be implementing that? So it really comes back to your best judgment. Because now the question isn't what just broke in WordPress, it's when should I adopt this new feature? Does this matter for my context, my clients, my projects? Is it stable enough? What can I safely ignore? You know, they kind of just put things on the back burner, store it up here, but put it on the back burner for projects. And that's not instability, that's kind of responsibility on your part as being the WordPress expert, the WordPress engineer, the project management person, the person who's the developer. And that's where professional maturity kind of shows up in your planning stages. So the key takeaway really for WordPress in 2026, I think, is big disruption forces decisions, but continuous evolution that requires more judgment skills. So more your 10,000 overview, thinking about all these different components that's being released into WordPress and when you should use them, should you use them. It's really a judgment call for that. So WordPress doesn't usually land big ideas directly in core anymore. We're back to that kind of features as a plugin, but not really. With most meaningful editor changes now is happening first in that Gutenberg plugin. So if you've got the Gutenberg plugin installed, that's your kind of cutting edge, bleeding stuff regarding the block editor. They kind of iterate in there, they test it out, they throw it on WordPress.com, and then they stabilize it first, and then they merge it into core. So you're not seeing kind of big jerky moves anymore in WordPress core. With newer areas though, like AI and collaboration, we're also seeing that kind of return to these canonical experiment plugins, you know, features as plugins and packages that are developed kind of alongside core rather than inside it. And that's really good. It's intentional, but it's really good for us because it allows kind of faster integration upstream, lower risk downstream, you know, because these are side-by-side implementations. You don't have to bring it into core. You're not having core bugging out all the time. It's an optional adoption as well. It's up to us to adopt that rather than it having been forced on us. And it's a bit of a smaller blast radius as well, because if you're dealing with a plugin, you're not dealing with core across 100 different websites. Richard says, would WordPress ever get ported to Python, or is it PHP to eternity? PHP to eternity, all the way. So if WordPress feels like it's always evolving, it's because experimentation is always happening, but it's not always happening just in core now. We're kind of moving more out to plugins again and testing those alongside core. So let's set some realistic expectations for 2026. Yes, real-time collaboration is significant. It's likely coming in the next few versions. So is deeper AI integration. So are responsive styling controls and client-side media works, the media manager. But notice something, that all of these build on the current editor and the current block system. That was the disruptive element to core. Now that's in and it's reasonably mature. Like it or hate it, up to you, but it's reasonably mature. And now that they are extending it, so they're not replacing it. This is not another kind of Gutenberg or customizer moment where like your kind of mental model changes overnight and you're like, oh, everything's changed. It's kind of more reactive, more additive. And that's the maturity of the platform showing through. So the WordPress core is advancing with phase 3 of the Gutenberg project. It's embedding AI carefully. I think they're kind of taking baby steps. They're not kind of shoving it into core, which is good. It's refining the responsive tooling, which has been missing for a long time and which is needed, which is good. And it's tightening up the usability cases by extending these new things and the things that people have been asking for a long time, like media management, like better media management, that sort of stuff. So that's not discarding the foundations that they're built on in phase 2. It's really kind of the difference between kind of expansion and reinvention. They're expanding rather than reinventing at the moment. And that's why the platform still feels busy, but it's not being destabilized, which is good for us. So the expansion still feels big. There still feels lots of stuff going into WordPress this year, possibly, especially with real-time collab and AI. But, it's expanding. It's not destabilizing the core because they're developing them as side projects and carefully monitoring how people are thinking about these things, are adopting these things. So that's good. So core, I put it here, core is extending, not resetting. So that's always a big thumbs up for me. What has changed? Probably more visibly over the last year or two, it generally looks and feels different to working WordPress. The editing experience is more opinionated. The site editor is more usable than it used to be. Patterns aren't a kind of side feature anymore. They're often like a starting point. FSE, full site editor for me, I remember one of our first meetups back after COVID. I was talking about WordPress version 5, I think it was, with the new full site editor and stuff. And it wasn't usable. It felt like a big disruption. It was a big thing for those. So that's been what, I don't know, maybe four and a bit years since then. And just now, I'm talking to clients about FSE, full site editor, headers and footers and patterns and stuff. So that as a product has matured for me to a point where it's now being considered in projects, so 4 or 5 years later, because the experience now is much more mature, it's much easier, it's much more stable as well. So that creates a strong perception of change because it kind of affects the first 5 minutes of every kind of talk that you're talking to with the clients, when you're taking them through WordPress and you're thinking about how that content is going to be structured. You're going to be opening the editor, you're going to be creating a page, you're going to be adjusting the layout. So is it going to be Elementor? Is it going to be bricks? Well, no, now it could be the block editor, and it could be a pattern. So those kind of moments shape how this the platform of WordPress is really maturing. But most of this change kind of lives at that interaction layer, how you assemble things, how defaults guide you, which options are present for you, and how much the system kind of nudges you towards certain workflows like pattern first, rather than starting with a blank page. But underneath, content is still posts, types, taxonomies, that sort of stuff. Performance still depends on architecture, and so all the stuff underneath is still there, but it feels, when we're interacting with it, it feels more visible now that stuff's kind of bubbling up to the top in the editor, the full site editor, the headers, the footers, that sort of stuff just feels more things have changed on the surface. So for example, the site editor is now becoming the default experience for block themes. Pattern first workflows is replacing that kind of blank page start now. The UX and UI has stabilized after years and years of churn of things moving around. Increased consistency across the editing context as well. So when you're clicking on a block now, you're starting to figure out that there's consistent options on the side now. There could be more, but you're still getting into that kind of consistency. Okay, so that reminds me, I've said the customizer a few times, but it reminds me, if you've been around long enough, you've probably seen all this drama happen before. I remember when people were furious about the customizer being forced on them. I think that was 2016. Is that 2016? Round about then. Yeah, so that fury, that felt like a massive at the time. It was a big shift. It was a big drama, like the Gutenberg editor. It felt like WordPress had fundamentally changed overnight. But looking back, it wasn't really an architectural reset. It was an intentional shift towards a different way of working. But again, that was a surface change for that. So I remember the good old customizer days. Another question for you, if you want to chat this, put this down in the chat window, is what WordPress change did you notice immediately but realized that later on it didn't actually change the way that you build stuff? Interesting question. So while some of the changes have been a lot of visual, because a lot of the focus has been on the full site editor and the Gutenberg block editor, underneath, WordPress still behaves the same way as it always has. So content modeling still matters, performance is still contextual, maintenance still is maintenance, things still break, scale still exposes shortcuts and things like that. But if someone built solid WordPress sites 5 or 10 years ago, most of the actual instincts are still valid today. The architecture underneath hasn't changed that much. New workflows can make earlier stages a bit smoother. Defaults tend to hide complexity now, so think about the theme.json. If that's done correctly up front, that's okay. But eventually, structure, architecture, constraints kind of will reassert themselves over time. And a lot of that frustration comes from assuming modern workflows have removed old limits, which they haven't. They've just kind of moved when you encounter them. So as the platform matures, things seem a little bit easier up front, but some of the complexity, it can sometimes be pushed down the project's timeline to where you're getting ready to implement that sort of stuff. So some examples are content, as I say, it's still post types, taxonomies, and metadata. That's not changed. So fundamentally, WordPress is still the same underneath. Queries and rendering still determine largely the performance outcomes. So if you've got really bad queries, I'm working with a client at the moment, and their website is really, really slow in the back end. So we're looking at what queries it's making, what can we do to change that around. Hosting quality still matters more than front end choices. Usually, if you pay for a crappy host, you get a crappy service mainly. Poor content structure still becomes painful at scale. That hasn't changed. Long-term maintenance still costs more than the initial build, usually, especially if the client wants to change stuff. Collaboration doesn't change the content model. So even if we're going to get this kind of fancy new multi-editor people changing things all kind of Google Docs style, the content underneath is still the same. It's still a title and you've got your blocks and stuff underneath. AI suggestions don't change the architecture at the back end. It's largely structural. And responsive controls, they don't really eliminate layout trade-offs either. So underneath, WordPress still behaves like WordPress, but what we're seeing is a lot of changes visually on the kind of the top, the way it renders. A couple of things come in the chat. Gutenberg editor was introduced in WordPress on 2018 as part of the WordPress 5. Yep, okay, 2018, my goodness, such a long time ago. And Richard says, later on, not now, but do you have any info about hardening security? Okay, well, maybe go back round to some of these questions at the end. Yep, security. Okay, right. Let's keep moving on. So a lot of WordPress changes over the last year, generally reduce friction at the start of the project, that's what I was saying. So a lot of the things at the start of a project now seem a bit easier with your structural stuff, your full site editing, your headers and footers, all that sort of stuff is good. Theme.json, you can set all that stuff up, which is great. And you can really get something decent looking on screen a lot faster now, I think, than you used to, especially while thinking back to the classic editor. Defaults do more work, fewer decisions are required upfront, but the complexity hasn't disappeared. It's just kind of moved, as I mentioned before. So instead of being explicit early on, the complexity now kind of shows up a little bit later in the projects. Usually when something needs to scale, or when something needs to change, or when something needs to behave differently than what the defaults are expected. That shift is not good or bad, it just is. It's a trade-off. But it changes where the expertise is required. So what I'm trying to say here is that features change, complexity doesn't really change. It's still there. It's just more of a judgment call on us as to when to implement things and when to make those calls. So some examples, blocks, the abstract and markup and layout decisions, the theme configuration. So centralizing the behavior instead of templates now. We're moving now into theme.json and blocks. Defaults, hiding edge cases until later in the project. So there's a lot more stuff that works out the box now across browsers until you get that managing director who's still on some bizarre version of, I don't know, not Internet Explorer, but say one of those old browser things, and they defiantly will not move. You're like, debugging tends to start a little bit later on in projects now, I think, because you're doing all that structural stuff up front, and you're really getting into the meat later on in the project. And custom behavior is kind of requires more of a deeper understanding of the whole system. I feel nowadays we're not just WordPress. We're WordPress. We're a form system. We've got webhooks. We're integrating with CRMs. We've got automation going. So WordPress now, I feel, is more of a system than it is just a CMS, which means you've got to take that 10,000 view above to see how it all works and integrates with everything. So this is why projects can feel smoother earlier on, because the concept is easier. But once you start to get deep into the implementation, that's when you start to kind of uncover that complexity again. It was always there. It's just kind of been hidden up front a little bit with patterns and things like that. And this is where experience really shows up. Experienced developers, they don't fight that complexity. They anticipate when it's going to surface. So you can't really eliminate complexity. Your job as the experienced WordPress developer, WordPress designer, is really to decide where it shows up and to deal with it then. So this is where the real skill gap is. It's in judgment, not knowledge. So most people here in the meetup, I know a lot of you, you can learn tools quickly. There's heaps of YouTube tutorials, there's lots of courses. So learning all the new stuff that WordPress is throwing at you, that's no longer the bottleneck. That's easy to do. The harder skill really now is judgment. It's knowing when to adopt something and when to wait, when to stop optimizing, and when good is good enough. It's still actually the right call. I still see projects, I still see developers, clients with agencies going through version 16. I'm like, just get the thing out there, or bringing everything, all these edge cases in at once, and you're like, no, that's not the way to go. So it's the experience that really matters at the moment. I think it's that kind of judgment case of, is that the right thing to do right now, or can we push that or integrate that into another phase or later phase? So WordPress in 2026 offers more viable ways to do things than ever before. It's much more flexible. So it's long surpassed just being a blog. It's long surpassed just being a business website. It's now like a headless, restless API, whatever. Now it's being linked in with AI, so it's going to take over the world. It just seems that, WordPress can go in every direction that you want it to, more than ever before. And that's great. That's real freedom. It's real ability to use WordPress for anything. But with that freedom, and this, I think, has always been the case with WordPress, with that freedom, it always increases the cost of making bad decisions, especially early ones. It's that, should I use Elementor or Divi because it's easy to drag stuff off, versus, but I want to have 1,000 concurrent users and now my performance is down the toilet. It's the, should I install those 40 plugins, 10 of which have 1,000 features, but I'm only using the one, and oh, why is my website slow? It's those sort of decisions that you have to make, that the judgment's called. So experienced developers, they don't necessarily know more. They shouldn't necessarily know more. It's just how they decide about these different edge cases, these different functions and features and stuff that's coming in to WordPress. Experienced developers, they tend to say no more often. And I know it's very difficult. I did a whole webinar on saying no, a 90-minute webinar on saying no to things. But that's experience. It's experience and judgment. And experienced developers, they're going to leave things alone more confidently, and just being able to say no to more things, able to push complexity down the line and deal with it then. So some examples, multiple valid ways to build the same site nowadays: full site editor, page builder, headless. You can build your own front end now. Fewer universally agreed best practices. I think WordPress back 15 years ago, there was a kind of best practice way to do templates and to write PHP. Now, because WordPress is kind of everything to everyone, as in it's so flexible, there's not really a best practice way of doing something anymore. Early architectural choices are becoming very expensive to reverse. So if you're choosing that way of implementing something, because we're talking about bigger systems like e-commerce, like learning management systems, if you subscriptions and subscription models, if you choose that the wrong way, then reversing it out later on when you've got real production data, it becomes very, very expensive to change. Over optimization, so creating long-term maintenance costs as well. We want to avoid that, and confidence coming from the context of what you need to implement, not from certainty. So I think experience is still something that a lot of people need. I think if you're going to go into these kind of bigger complex jobs with WordPress that extends to everything, e-commerce, all that sort of thing, it's really that case of being able to judge where at that 10,000 level fee as to where all these components fit in. So WordPress in 2026, it's changing. There's lots of change coming. There's some surface stuff. There's maybe some underground stuff as well in the back end. But we don't have to implement everything all the time. It really is your best judgment case as to when to bring those new features in, and within the context of your project or your client roadmap as well. So WordPress itself, it's not really a frantic thing, but the ecosystem round about it can feel very noisy at times. There can be a little flurry of activity about stuff. I gave an example earlier on about the AI and MCP servers. So it can feel noisy. It can feel like there's lots of stuff happening. It can feel very fast sometimes. There can be some very loud opinions from a very few minorities online. There's a lot of you must do this now type energy, fear of missing out, jumping on the bandwagon, that sort of stuff. But that pressure doesn't come from the platform itself. It comes from how we consume all the information about it. Social media, Slack, make.wordpress, all these areas where people are talking about all these nice fancy things. It can create a bit of anxiety sometimes. So the people who tend to do well in these situations are the people who don't react fast, are not implementing everything that comes up all the time. You can look into it, you can create your side project, but you're not folding it into client projects straight away. Those are the people who are filtering a lot better. It's like, that's happening. That's the way that WordPress is going. That's the direction that they're moving in. Okay, that's interesting. I'll park it up here, but not implement that just now. And so these types of people, they're going to understand what matters for their context, their client, their projects, and what doesn't. They're going to stand a better chance in completing projects, being calm as well, not over-delivering, and having really successful projects that the clients can benefit from them. They don't chase every update. Please do not chase every update, but adopt deliberately. Have a look at the things that are coming, test them, play with them, have a think about how you could use them, but don't jump the gun and just kind of push them all into your client projects. So calm is not a personality trait. It's a professional skill. Judgment is. It's built from experience, pattern recognition, and thinking about what problems are worth solving and what issues it could create down the line. So that could mean things like choosing stability over novelty features on long-lived websites. The client might like the idea of connecting everything up with AI, but that might not be the best thing for his client base, the users, the stability of the platform. Saying no to changes that don't justify their cost is always a big thing. Explaining trade-offs calmly to clients and stakeholders. So why you're not implementing it? Well, here's the reason. It looks like a good idea, but it's really a new it's really like a new feature. It's not matured yet. It doesn't have the developer or the experience behind it. The community is not on board with it yet. All that sort of stuff. Being able to understand what new features are there, but being able to talk to your clients and say, oh, this is the reason why I think we should or should not implement that right now. And that avoids rebuilds driven by things like trend anxiety. This new thing's coming. Oh, this client wants it. Oh, you just need to stay calm and say, well, is that really best for you? Here's the pros, here's the cons. So it really kind of boils down to letting some new things that are coming out in WordPress in 2026 really kind of mature before adopt them into kind of real world scenarios. So the key takeaway here really is treat calm judgment as a professional advantage, not as an indecision, not as you not knowing what you're doing, you not wanting to implement these things. It's more of a calm, consciously, okay, right, I understand what's coming, I understand that, and I'll implement that in good context and in good time. Okay, that's it. a little bit of a different spin on WordPress in 2026. We know that there's lots of things coming. We know that there's been lots of change in the past couple of years. I really want to try and twist this into a think about what's happening, what's coming in WordPress, where it's changing, and how you should adapt to implementing a research, having a real think about projects, your clients, the systems that you're building, not just WordPress, and how those things can be implemented, maybe not straight away, but strategically at points down the line for those. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. I know it's been a bit of a weirdy one, but some discussions here. Happy to take any questions in the chat if you want to drop them down. Some discussion prompts here. So where do you feel friction today? So thinking about all the things I've talked about, where WordPress has journeyed over the last year and a half. Where do you feel the friction is for yourself at the moment, maybe in your personal projects or your client projects? What feels harder now than it used to? So change isn't always good. Change isn't always perceived the same way from the same people as well. So what feels a bit harder now in WordPress than it did a year ago, 5 years ago, and maybe what still feels stubbornly familiar? Media Manager. Here's me. You can get in contact with me with my details there, or have a look on meetup.com. And just the last slide. So next month, choosing your WordPress stack. I'm going to stop sharing. There's no pressure to cam up. There's no pressure to speak on the microphone. I'm going to have a look through some of the chats and just see if there's any questions. Manly Electronics says, I think WordPress has enough problems to fix forever, and they keep piling on new features. Yeah, I can see that. I was quite vocal about the real-time collab, maybe not on Make, but certainly within the WordPress Australian community. I'm not on board with that particular change. I think it'll benefit a very small percentage of maybe highly paid agencies and companies. I can't think of any use case where I would need or want 2 or 3 people in a page or post at the same time. Yeah, that just feels a bit weird to me. Yeah, Mike says real-time collab completely overcomplicate things. I've been running the Elementor stack for quite a while. I do the Elementor Australian meetups, and they were talking about real-time collab, but then they focused on notes. So you can add little notes into a WordPress page, and you can collaborate on the notes, and that is fantastic. I love that. Leaving little notes for clients or other developers or people, and then they can see what your thoughts were behind the layout and stuff, and then they can just add to it. That works fantastically for me. I love that. But I wouldn't want the copywriter, I wouldn't want the designer, I wouldn't want the marketing guy all changing stuff on the page at the same time. That freaks me out. It gives me anxiety. Yeah, DK, your system has notes now too. Yeah. Yeah. There was talk about security. Let's just have a quick look. Richard was talking about, do you have any info about hardening security of plugins and or moving add-ons to a lower set of credentials, or even just reporting in the current environment? Number of add-ons either includes malicious libraries. Okay, so right, so plugins and security. Yeah, security has always been an issue with WordPress. Not so much the core. The core is largely stable. Sometimes they find fixes, but they push them out within hours sometimes. So for the most part, the WordPress core, if you just run WordPress, it's fine. But it is the plugins that cause the security. And this is a problem with WordPress. WordPress is so flexible. Back in the days, this is the way it was built. WordPress was open sourced, anyone could do anything, and everyone did everything. And that's one of the reasons why WordPress is so successful, because you could modify it in any way. But with you, when you got no constraints and no boundaries, that's when things fall apart. So I mean, there's definitely things you can do to WordPress to harden it. It's making sure your folder permissions are good, running a security plugin. So don't just rely on the hosting environment. I know people like Kinsta and WP Engine have got their own solutions for doing that, but I think running a security plugin is warranted as well. So it's maintaining that. It's thinking about what type of plugins you want or you need on your system. For example, I have been in strategy meetings where clients have things like File Manager. They have plugins called WP Reset, all on a production server. And it's like, whoa, bad karma, bad karma. So it's your choice of plugins as well that really matters. I might do a security one later on in the year, just focused on security, because I've got a big security talk. If you look at the YouTube channel for previous meetups, I usually do a big security talk every couple of years. And I go way down the rabbit hole. I talk a lot about biometric stuff and mind stuff. So, and I talk about Sun Tzu, the art of war. So if you really want kind of hardcore WordPress security, have a look at one of those talks. I did one last year, I think. But hopefully that's touched on some of the issues for you there. Let's have a look. Any plans of updates on XML RPC, REST API exposure is a nightmare. Again, these systems are open. XML RPC, I disable that. It's like a two-line code. I've even got a plugin that does that. Just get rid of it. You don't need it. REST API, yeah, well, it does expose a lot of things, but it also allows you to build a lot of things as well. So that's more development best practices in security when you're implementing that. Is making sure when you're exposing endpoints that you're exposing the right data and that you're allowing the right data. I know I talked about AI MCP servers, but they're probably actually a better way of implementing this, because with the MCP servers, you actually dictate what data they are allowed to consume. So with REST API, it's completely open, and you've got to kind of lock it down. MCP servers are kind of the other way that kind of lock down, and then you've got to open them up. So it's an alternative way of talking to WordPress. I quite like that. Scrolling down as well. Real-time collab worked out great for AWS when they allowed multiple read-write sessions to automated servers. Yes, that worked really well, didn't it? Didn't slow things down at all. Manly electronics, I encountered cart spam and WooCommerce bots. Yes, can't disable it. Made a solution. Okay, all right. Yeah, so again, that's a kind of the security bit there. I had experience with that as well. I had card fraud testing a few years ago. Couldn't figure out why. I had the whole front end hardened. Long story short, they were using the REST API endpoints to the back end. And because there was no back end nonces or not to say captures, but kind of that kind of checking, then it was just going straight in to the API and they were able to manipulate the API to purchase stuff. So once I put in a server-based kind of capture and nonce, that disappeared instantly. And there's also Cloudflare Turnstile, there's Stripe Radar, I think. So there's lots of different things you can use to try and defeat that. But yeah, if you ping me, I've got a PDF on card tests and fraud and how to stop that. I'm happy to give that to you. Security, clean top, yep. What was a nonce system? It was more a kind of server-based. It was a custom function that I wrote that the REST API couldn't submit something until it had a nonce validated. At the moment, if you just expose the WooCommerce REST API, anyone can do like a background transaction for that and get it published, which is not good. Richard says a decade ago, Microsoft was finally getting rid of Java on all servers, redirecting 3,000 new servers. Oh, it's gone. Okay. Yeah. Old Java version sitting on 1/3 of production. Yep. Cart spam. Yes, it was incredibly annoying and incredibly costly when I had to refund stuff. Any more questions on WordPress, future 2026? Things you're excited, things you're not excited, what anxiety you have? Drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll give a couple of minutes and then let everyone go to their dinner, especially me. I can't see anything else coming through in chat.
Thanks for the meetup.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you turning up. What time is it there?
12:22, 22 minutes after midnight.
Okay. Well, thank
DK
you.
is sort of a Northwest neighbor. We're both in the Pacific time zone.
Fantastic.
But you always have good stuff, so I appreciate you hosting.
Well, thanks very much for turning up. I do appreciate it. Okay, everyone, I am going to call that a night. I will put the slides up on Meetup. I'll send any relevant information out to that. Thank you, everyone, for turning up. If you've got any additional questions, post them on Meetup, send me an email. If not, I'll see you next month on choosing your WordPress stack. Okay, thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye.